All right, welcome back. Now, with almost 90 days to the general election, the stakes couldn't be higher, as candidates are now more or less clear on the political parties they will represent. In August, Kenyans are spoiled for choice on just who they will vote for. Presidential candidates are now on the hunt for running mates, combing through qualifications of possible suitors. The question is, however, does the Kenyan voter have a criteria against which to vet their future leaders? That's a discussion on the Voters Hub tonight. But before I introduce my panel, we asked some Kenyans whether they knew the roles of their local leaders. And here's what they had to say. Take a look.
Kawaida ni ana present wakilishi wa ward katika mashinani, na pia wanaweza kuwakilisha, wanaenda wa bunge MC, wanaenda kwa bunge kutuwakilisha mashida ambazo tuko nao katika mashinani. Wanaweza kutengeneza barabara, maji, na pia kuangalia masuala ya wakilishi ward katika sehemu yetu.
Kazi ya MCA ni legislation, representation na oversight.
Mwakilishi wangu wa bunge ni Samuel Arama, na kazi yake kule bungeni ni kuturepresent, kumake laws na kuonyesha interest zetu kama wananchi zimeangaliwa.
Mbunge wangu anafanya vizuri, ingawaje MCA ana kazi yafanye. Tutamtoa.
Role ya MP ni kuimplement policies na pia kumake sherias.
Tunakuta kwamba wanakimbia majukumu yao, wanaenda huko, wanakaa kabisa, wakati wanarudi kutafuta kura ndo wanaona tena wanakuja wanataka kura zetu, ndio wanaanza tena kuangalia talents, kama ni talents ni vitu zingine kuweza baada ya kuwa sasa ndo washakuja tena wakati wa siasa.
MP wetu anaitwa Mbogo. Majukumu yake pia yanastahili kuwa kama tu hayo kushirikia mambo ya barabara, mambo ya masomo na elimu, yani health. Hiyo.
All right, those were a few Kenyans having their say from across the country. Let me introduce my panel really quickly. From my far right is Ruth Bolo, the chairperson of the International Relations Committee at the Young Democrat Union. We also have to my right Judy Wangu from the Tugutuke Revolution. And last but not least, to my left is David Kabeberi, also from the Tugutuke Revolution. Thank you so much all for joining me. You've heard the sentiments of quite a few Kenyans there on what they think the general roles of MPs and MCAs are. And I also asked a question at the top of the bulletin, what people actually look for in terms of criteria for their leaders. Leonard on Twitter is saying, I look for discipline, hard work, responsibility in the leader that I will vote for come August 9th. Esther saying, I am looking for a governor who can transform Embu County. David, let me begin with you. And I guess before we get into the meat of the discussion, if you can kind of take me through what Tugutuke is all about and why it came to be.
Thank you, Victoria. Tugutuke really was born out of concern for voters' apathy. Yeah. And it was born out of concern of young people who are concerned about their fellow young people not wanting to take part in the elections. And the conversation became why. And after examining it, this group of young people said it is wrong to actually not take part in the elections. If you feel that your vote is not going to count, then what we ought to do is make it count. Right. Do what it is that will help you make the elections make a difference. So the small group, a really small group, about 15 young people aged from 22 to 32. Okay. Took some time to debate, ask around, and eventually concluded that it is true that in the several elections that have gone past, candidates come, they tell you promises. Those promises have become lies, and eventually people are just tired of doing the same thing the same way, expecting different results. Right. And they narrowed down to what the problem is. And the problem is that we are not able to hold MPs and MCAs accountable. We vote for them, and we will see them again in 5 years' time. Right. In between these 5 years, there is nothing that you can do to make them meet their promise. The closest that you could do is the recall. Right. In the Constitution, grants the right to recall MPs to voters. But the way the MPs themselves created the process for recall, it's really needle in the haystack sort of thing. Therefore, what the young group of people decided to do is to create a mechanism by which you can hold MPs accountable, and that is by making candidates pledge or commit in writing, publicly, in advance, that they will, firstly, be true representatives of the people. It's something that we've forgotten over time, that in fact an MP is not your Lord and King, is not your deliverer, he's actually your representative. He's supposed to take your views and represent them in Parliament.
Right.
Over and above the other functions of oversight, which is the most important function. Of course, they're oversighting on behalf of the people themselves.
Right.
So if we are able to get MPs and MCAs and senators and women rep, the people who are representatives, to be directly accountable to the people, then maybe the houses can work for the people. Maybe then they will feel the obligation to do the oversight properly.
And let me bring Judy in here, because it's not like we don't have structures or legislation that, you know, kind of gives that direction. We have Chapter 6 of the Constitution, the supreme law. And it's fantastic if you can have these leaders sign, you know, this commitment to say that they'll actually... But how do we guarantee that if they've also been in contravention of Chapter 6, you know, in the last couple of elections?
How do we make sure that they
that you can actually
follow
hold them
the
accountable? Exactly.
Well, if on the pledge we are talking about the right to recall, then if the mechanisms are put in place properly to allow that, then I believe it will happen.
So are there specific, you know, points that they're being held to within that commitment? What are those things?
The first of all will be they should be able to represent the people.
Okay.
And they should be able to adhere to the Chapter 6, which is on leadership and integrity. Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm, you know, a constituent, I've had my MCA or MP sign those, how do I practically hold them to account? That's what I'm wondering, because it needs to move from the piece of paper to actually translate to something that is transformative for my life on a daily basis, for instance.
But then that's where now, again, we talk about even us participating in this politics, because what happens is we give them the work to go and represent us, but then we don't have ways of appraising whether they are actually doing it. So I believe that even us as the citizens, then we have the responsibility to hold to appraise them. And if they don't, then we take them out.
You know, Ruth, let me bring you in there, because what Judy's talking about is having an active citizen, right? You're literally taking the power back into your own hands, because you've given that up once you voted for them to at least responsibly carry that out. But we don't see that happening and translating to the benefit of the voter or the electorate. So from where you sit, how do we begin to see that shift where they actually represent and do for you what they said they would on the campaign trail?
First of all, there is the Public Participation Forum, which, of course, the Constitution has provided for us. But we rarely go out of our way to actually, one, attend, and two, follow up. Because, again, as we've always said, Kenyans are a very forgetful lot. So today we will all be angry on social media about an item, and then the minute we've had there's a fire somewhere else, and then attention shifts. Or the minute the president adjusts his mic and says, fellow Kenyans, our attention shifts. And so I think the first thing is that Kenyans need to be told, and it needs to be reinforced in their minds, that the reason why we are having a problem with the economy is because of this. The reason why there are children who are not able to go to schools that have proper infrastructure, it is because of this. The reason that road in your home has not been properly made, it's probably because your MCA hasn't lobbied for it. The reason that this is happening is because your MP has not tabled it in Parliament. So the minute citizens are able to understand that my quote-unquote suffering is as a result of my poor leader, then best believe they will go out of their way to be active. But what is happening now is Unfortunately, Kenyans have given up, and they're just feeling like, you know, it doesn't matter what I do, things are not going to change. We also have cases where in certain counties, people or in certain constituencies, they don't actually carry out the public participation forums as it should be done. So they'll go ahead and gazette it and not make use of the local radio stations. Because remember, when they're campaigning, they'll go all out. Yep. They'll use the local radio stations, they'll use the local print media that's available. They'll even use the announcers back in the village just to make sure that when you're going to sleep, you only think about Ruth Bolo, you know. But when it comes to the public participation forum, so they'll gazette it. And then once because we've had very many cases where people say when immediately we got to the venue, first of all, they came late, or they came, gave us sodas and biscuits, and then left. Yeah. And then no one complains about it. And now the second question would be, are there actually mechanisms to put these legislators to task once someone complains about it? Because that's another reason why citizens don't complain and say, well, in our constituency, they called us for a public participation forum. This is what we discussed, and it has never happened. Yeah, yeah. So we need to actually put in mechanisms, that stringent ones, that actually put these legislators to task so that they know that this is the consequence of this. And as a result of their misbehavior, it's trickling down. That's why you see even as some of the public servants, they're not even scared to take bribes. They don't even blink because they know at the end of the day, my boss does it and his boss does it and her boss probably does it as well.
You know, David, I have to bring you in here because when you think about, sure, we know we need to hold our leaders accountable, but the question is, what are we holding them accountable for? When you heard some of those vox pops and those individuals speaking, a lot of their understanding of the roles of the MCAs and MPs was very superficial. You know, and they didn't kind of have a strong grasp as to what it was their local leaders were to do for them. And so, I mean, that speaks to a civic education gap. How do we begin to address that?
Well, and you're right. You know, if you remember that the campaign started immediately after the last election. So since the last election, people have been listening to campaign talk.
Right.
And at every campaign, even the MPs and the MCAs often campaign on the easy things. So they will be campaigning on how to manage the CDF, for example. Because that's nice and easy. I will build a toilet, I'll build a wall, I'll do this, that, the other. And of course, they don't really tell you that the CDF fund altogether is just 2.5% of the total budget. And if 15% is with the counties, there's 87%. Right. So who's looking after the 87%? But because it's easier to get elected on these small little items, the campaign takes that trend and people then begin to think that your MP is supposed to build a road, that your MP is supposed to bring schools. I had an MP, a current MP, who's been sitting MP for 3 terms, saying he's sure he's going to be re-elected because he has brought roads and schools, and not even up country in Nairobi. So the ability, it's very important that we are able to explain the true role of MPs. And actually that should start with the candidates themselves. If they themselves understand what their function is, then in their campaign they can see how to put it to people. But at Tukutuke, what we do want to do, we want to create a large public online platform that will serve as a civic education for people, especially for the younger Kenyans. When I was in school, we used to have a civics class. I don't know if it's still there. So although it's usually told you who the minister for this was, but we understood something about civic responsibility and what happens. So we want to target mostly the young guys, the bigger part of the population on the platform with civic education. At this stage, it can't be the whole lot of it because we need to deal with what is currently urgent, and it is really largely what is the role of an MP. If, take for example, one of the things that really is surprising, if you understand the role, is MPs going around saying that the president has borrowed and borrowed too much. But it is the MPs who approve the expenditure.
Exactly.
Therefore, the president couldn't have borrowed unless the MPs approved it. And if, in fact, the president, if it's him who borrowed, borrowed more than the MPs thought he should have borrowed, actually their function is to impeach him. Because the Constitution gives them the responsibility to institute proceedings to remove the president, the deputy president, and any state officer. But it's not their function to come to rallies and tell us that the president has done this, that, or the other. Now that will take a little bit of time for us to understand, but I think it can be done. It's not too difficult, and largely people sort of have an idea now of what are the problems with voting.
Absolutely.
People know that, quite honestly, if you ask people who they voted for the last time, they probably don't know.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing. Ruth, as we wrap up, your final thought as well.
Okay, I just want to jump in real quick on what he has said. It's funny because a lot of these legislators only speak up when now they have gone to the other camps. I mean, we were watching earlier when someone tells Matiang'i, keep quiet or else, we're going to expose you. So why do we have to wait for you to cross over to the other side, for you to actually start doing your work? Where were you? Where was the oversight all along? But there's one thing that media stations normally do, the presidential debate. If we can have the NGOs and the CBOs cascade this downwards, I think it plays a very big role in helping the electorate understand, one, what is the role of this person I'm about to elect? And two, who is this person? So what does this person stand for? And who is this person behind, the microphones? And because most of the time what is happening in rallies is, if I'm a good orator and she is a candidate, I will go on and I will hike the crowd up. And by the time she's coming to speak, they don't even want to hear what I want to do for them. They just want to see you dance.
Exactly.
So if by the time they're sitting behind those seats at a debate for county assembly or whatever it is, and they're asked very tough questions, then it is at that point that some of these electorates, I believe, will be moved.
Judy, last word goes to you. When do you think, I know this is a very idealistic question, but when do you think things will actually change, that we'll begin to see these model leaders actually take office?
I think that would happen when we fix the political system, because that's where the main gap is on. Yeah.
So fixing political parties. All right. Thank you so much, Ruth, Judy, and David, for your time. I wish we had more, but it starts the conversation when it comes to vetting our leaders. 90 days to the next general election. Lots to think about when you head to the ballot. On that note, let's take a short break. We'll be back with much more. Excellence on a roll.